I understand you've been studying the prophets, and if you're like our class, I go to conference class mostly, and we're all over the place. You know, we have guest people in, we teach each other, and varieties of subjects. So I decided to bring a message to, not a message, a lesson, let's call it that, today about deism. Does that word ring a bell with anybody? You've heard of it, right? I'm not too sure whether you have or not. That's kind of where I was, and I found myself on more than one occasion talking to people who were deists. Some were rabid deists, some were just people who knew what they believed but didn't have a name for it. And I said, "Oh, you're a deist." "Well, I don't know about that, but I know what I think." And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. I want to kind of set this into perspective because being an old English teacher, you know, we take every chance we can to put in a few blows for the arts. So you have a handout in front of you, and don't worry that you haven't read it yet. It'll be like most of my students used to be. We have a reading assignment, nobody did it, so we had to read it in class or something like that. Well, anyway, this deistic period happened in England during the so-called Restoration 18th century. It was also called the Age of Reason, the neoclassical period for you historians. And then just simply the 18th century. A lot of things were going on. The Restoration refers to what?
Restoration of the monarchy.
Yeah. After the Commonwealth, after Oliver Cromwell and his group had taken over, the Puritans had taken over control of England, Parliament and all that stuff, and then when that collapsed, the English were ready to welcome back their Charles II. Well, they were ready to have him back because they thought these Puritans, everything was too stifled for them. You know, they closed the theaters and people were supposed to stay home and meditate and pray and, you know, not get involved in anything sinful. So they were ready to bring back, open the theaters up and meet again and so forth. So lots of good things were going on. It was also, in some ways, a reaction against some of the philosophy of the Renaissance. You know, if you know anything about the Renaissance, it means rebirth, reawakening, right? Things had kind of gotten to the point that people believed humans were capable of almost anything. Look what we have done so far. My goodness, the possibilities are endless. Well, that got kind of scary after a while. So people started thinking, well, maybe we're not capable of just anything. So it was a kind of conservative pulling back, in many ways, of thinking. Humans are limited, not limitless, as Renaissance people kind of thought. There were codes of conduct that kind of grew out of this. The idea of decorum. That word means something to you? We have so little of it anymore, I don't know.
Not much anymore.
I know.
Civilized behavior.
Yeah, you were supposed to behave in a respectable way, in a certain way, right? You wouldn't, for example, go to a church service or something and act in an unseemly way or dress, right, in a way that people deemed inappropriate. Right? You kind of had to mind your manners. In literature, it drifted over into playwriting in particular. If you had a character in a play who was a peasant, that person should act and speak like a peasant. If you had a king, a queen, a nobleman, noble person, that person would speak and act in that way, right? To do otherwise would be just heresy almost, okay? So you get the idea that this period was one of kind of pulling back, I guess is the word for it. Now, they also thought writers did, thinkers. This is also called the neoclassical age, and for the reasons that people went to the ancient writers. They said, hey, all these ancient playwrights, philosophers, and so on must have been doing something right, because we still have their work around and it's still valid. So maybe the deal is we can emulate them, right? Let's use them as models for what we want to do intellectually, emotionally, artistically, and so on, okay? Now, that little bit of background. One of the major writers of this period was Alexander Pope. Not the Pope. That's what my students used to always tell me. Oh, I remember, yeah, that was written by the Pope. No, not the Pope, Alexander Pope. That was his last name. Now, if your British lit is a little bit foggy, Pope was a very intellectual character. He was a Roman Catholic. As such, he couldn't vote, could not attend university. They want those Catholics around polluting the thing. Couldn't hold public office. And he could not receive patronage. You all know about the patronage system? I'll give you a real quick rundown, right? It's basically having somebody who would support you while you were engaged in writing or art or whatever it was. You had to have some kind of financial support. Well, Pope had none of that, but it didn't stop him from writing a lot of good stuff. What you have in front of you is an excerpt from a major piece of his called An Essay on Man. Now, if he were here and if he were writing this today, very politically incorrect title, correct? It would be called An Essay on People, Human. Okay. Well, this is a long time ago. An Essay on Humankind. What's the word essay mean, by the way? Well, they've written them.
Someone's opinion?
It literally means an attempt. It could be an attempt to inform, educate, amuse. Could have a purpose, right? Any kind of purpose. So an essay, and generally we think of these written in what? Poetry or prose? Mostly in prose. You all had freshman comp, didn't you, in school? And your teacher said, we're going to want you to write an essay for next class period on, we'd throw it out there for you to do, or you'd come up with your own topic. Right? I'll never forget one of my young students, I asked him to write a personal experience essay just to get the semester rolling. Because I thought, well, everybody will come up with some experience, right? She came up next week, she had nothing. I said, where's your essay? I couldn't think of anything to write about. I said, it's a personal experience. She said, I don't think I've ever had any.
Oh, God, love it.
And I thought, before I laughed, I thought, well, poor thing. She couldn't think of anything kind of that stood out in her life. So, that was the first challenge. So, essays generally are in prose, right? Paragraphs and stuff. Does this look like a prose piece here? No. Does it look like poetry?
Yes.
I don't want to get off into a long thing. We could spend 2 weeks and be talking to you about poetry and the art of it and all that, but I won't do that to you. How do you tell poetry when you see it? Or can you?
Usually by its form, you know, it's not a continuous line and then it's like a paragraph is. It's
Okay. Look at the very first bit of this. And at the end of each line, just look at the last words in each
Yeah, they
line
rhyme.
of this. What do you notice?
they rhyme.
All right, we have things, kings, supply, die, men, plant, shoot, fruit, and so forth, right? Every 2 lines rhyme. Okay, rhymed, here's a little something you can impress your friends with. It's called the heroic couplet. Heroic because it went way back to the ancients. 2 lines that rhyme, right? Also, the rhythm is consistent. Heroic couplets are, here's something else that win you a trivial contest. Heroic couplets have 5 feet per line. 5 feet, that sounds kind of like an insect. Well, the rhythm is unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, da-dum, 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 okay? It's called iambic because that's the pattern. Pentameter because it's 5 of them. If you look at this whole thing, we won't spend a lot of time on the mechanics of that, but that's how this is done, okay? So folks, very much in the mainstream here with this. Now, look with me if you would at about the middle of that first section. Together, let us beat this ample field. Everybody find that little section? Follow with me just a minute. Try what the open, what the covert yield. The latent tracks, the giddy heights explore of all who blindly creep or sightless soar. And we're getting to the good part here. Nature's walks, shoot folly as it flies and catch the manners living as they rise. Mark this little last couplet. Laugh where we must. That's not a bad statement there either. We probably need to laugh a little bit more, don't we, in this day and age? Laugh where we must, be candid where we can, but, let's all read the last line together, but vindicate the ways of God to man. Does that sound a little bit familiar to anybody from any other writer? John Milton wrote a wonderful long piece called Paradise Lost. You remember that? It struck terror in all my students. Vindicate the ways of God to man. Milton said his purpose in Paradise Lost was to justify the ways of God to man. He only changed one word. Justify the ways of God to man, and Pope says, I'm going to what? Vindicate. What's the difference in those 2 terms? Which one seems stronger to you? Justify kind of seems to mean, kind of bring these things together, and right? But vindicate implies what?
Protected.
Somebody's done something that needs explaining.
Finality.
Yeah. We have any lawyers in here? Our class is full of them. I guess the Compass class, all the lawyers all went there for some reason.
We have doctors and
Anyway, what is the? I'm going to introduce another word that fits all this. If you are accused of some wrongdoing, and you have to go to court, what is the premise that you go into this trial?
Innocent.
Until,
Proven guilty.
Yeah.
okay, that's the premise, okay? So what is a premise? It's important we get a handle on this.
that's the assumption of whatever it is you're going to try to explain or prove.
If I said to you, I'm going to tell you a joke. It's one of my favorite jokes, and it's nice and clean. Little Doug walks into a bar. Says to the bartender, hey, got any duck food? What's the premise you have to accept for me to go on with this joke? The duck can talk, then he walks into a bar and talks to a bartender in English, right? If you said to me, that's so silly, ducks don't talk, they're not apt to wander into a bar anywhere, so don't bother me with this, go away. You have not bought the premise, correct? But most of you would say, okay, for the sake of humor, right? You want to hear the rest of the joke?
Yeah.
You know, some of you might know. But it's a pretty good joke. Bartender said, no, I don't have any duck food. Get out of here. This is a place we serve drinks to people. I don't want you in here. The duck walks off. Tomorrow here he comes back. Hey, got any duck food? No, I don't have any duck food. I told you yesterday. Out. Get out. Don't want you here. Blah, blah. Third day, same thing. Third day, the bartender said, look it. Come in here tomorrow with this business. I'm going to nail both of your feet to the floor. And I'll show you. Duck walks off. Here comes day 4.
Oh.
Bartender looks at him and says, well, Duck says, hey, got any nails? Bartender says, no, I don't have any nails. Said, got any duck food? It's a good little joke. Well, that's my granddaughter when she was about 5 years old. She went to school and told everybody she could corner. Crazy. Okay. So the premise on which this piece is based has to do with a concept of the great chain of being. All right? Probably another phrase you've run across somewhere in your studies, I'm sure. The idea being that if you held a chain up, all the links would flow downward, correct? They used this, and Pope even mentioned it by name in this piece in a minute, we'll see it. It was the idea that there is one perfect being in the universe. That's God. Everything else comes down through varying ranks of imperfection, including, we had God up here, all the angelic hosts, who are not quite God, right? Even though they may be in heaven, but they still have flaws. On coming down next would be humans. Under that, other members of the animal kingdom. A little further down, insects, down to inanimates. You see the order? It made perfectly good sense to them to think of the universe in that way. When I mention the universe, I'm not just talking about the heavenly bodies, I'm talking about everything in existence. Okay? If you accept the great chain of being as a premise, then Pope's halfway home with his argument. And that's what this essay on man is all about. It's based on deistic philosophy. Now, let's take a look at, we're not going to read through this whole thing. Let's take a look at a couple of passages here, just to kind of get us going. Let's start with section 1, right where I left off. Look what he says. Say first, of God above or man below, what can we reason but from what we know? True, isn't it? Where does our reasoning come from? It comes from knowledge, doesn't it? How do you know not to stick your hand in an open flame? How do you know that?
Because it was in told not to.
Right.
Well, yeah, that too. How do you know not to jump off a 20-story building if you're not trying to commit suicide? If you've never done it, how do you know, how do you know that? You know it because you know of other people who have done it, maybe. Or you know that every time you drop something, what direction does it go? It goes down, it never goes up, does it? Good old gravity. So we take that knowledge, that's something known, and that's where our reasoning comes from. The reasonable thing is, I won't put my hand on a hot stove because it burns. Either I burnt myself or I watch other people get burned and so on. So we try to teach our children, hot, 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 right? Don't touch, don't touch, okay. What can we reason but from what we know? Look what he says next. From which to reason, of man, what see we but his station here? Human beings. all we have is just what we can see in our human link in the great chain, correct? From which to reason, there's that word again, or to which refer. The world's unnumbered, though God be known, 'tis ours to trace him only in our own. Our understanding of God, of the higher power, is limited by what?
What we can experience.
By our possibilities of what we conceive as imperfect humans. Okay? I'm going to pause here for just a second and tell you this. When you talk about deism, deists believe, well, lots of things. Number one, they believe that God was the only perfect being, power in the universe. Right? Everything else was imperfect. Every human being. And they will ask you, if you ever get in a discussion with a deist about religion, be prepared, because they're probably going to whip you into submission. And here's why. Do you all agree all humans are imperfect? Okay? You bought that premise. All humans are imperfect. So you say, well, I'm a Christian. What's your Christianity based on? It's based on my biblical knowledge of biblical writing. Who wrote that Bible?
Humans.
Humans. All humans are what?
Imperfect.
Imperfect. So if you agree that all humans can make a mistake, you got to admit that everything in the Bible could be just a mistake. Oh, but, here we go, we're going to pull this one out. Yeah, but, we believe that the Bible was inspired. Yeah, you on that wagon so far? Well, yeah, what does that mean? That means, well, God kind of told people what to write. Do what? Deists would tell you, God told them what to pay. You'd saying God dictated this? Well, not quite exactly like that, but yeah. Well, is God still telling people what to write? How come the Bible books, and there aren't any more? God ever tell you what to write? That's all reason stuff, right? It's reasoned stuff. Well, okay. What about Jesus? How does he fit into me? He's a human being, right? Well, you just told me you believe all humans are imperfect. If Jesus was a human, he must have been imperfect too. We'll allow that he existed and that he might have been a good person. But being the Son of God, are you kidding me? That doesn't make any sense, doesn't it to you? Reasonable. Well, the reason you have trouble with dealing with deists is they have reason on their side. What have we got?
Faith.
Faith. Right. We don't become Christians because we reason our way to that. Now, it might help to be a reasonable person, but most of us become Christians because we have faith. We believe something because, well, to us it might make sense, but also because that's correct. Well, you know, because our parents taught us that page, so the last couple of lines, is the great change. Who's at the top of the chain of being? You or God?
God.
God, all right? We're all in agreement with that, correct? All right, let's go a little further. Come on down to the next page. It's on the back, actually. I've used the back and front. Look what he just said at the beginning of section 2. This is an essay on man, but here he addresses us. Anyway. And what does he call us humans? Presumptuous. What in the world does that mean? If you're is that a compliment? Somebody calls you presumptuous, what are they telling you? You're taking liberties where you don't deserve to have any. You presume something and it may not be true, and you may not have a right to. Let's look at it. Presumptuous man, exclamation mark. Poets don't use that thing very much.
Mark only allows 3 in your lifetimes.
That's probably too many. The reason, there's that word again, the reason wouldst thou find why form so weak, so little, and so blind. He's got a whole bunch of exclamation marks there. You're trying to find the reason why you are so weak, so little, and so blind. A lot of us can identify with that, right? We all feel kind of weak and little and blind. And first, he says, if you can, the harder reason guess why form no weaker, blinder, and no less. That's kind of the optimist-pessimist thing, isn't it, almost? You might find that you are better than you think you are. That's just as difficult. Let's go a little further. Ask of them of the earth why oaks are made taller or stronger than the weeds they shade. That makes pretty good sense. Come down to the next indention. Of systems possible. Check this out. If it is confessed that wisdom infinite must form the best, where all must full and not coherent be, and all that rises in due degree, he's just right there, referred to the great chain of being again. Look at the thing. Then in the scale of reasoning life, notice how often that word keeps coming up? It's plain there must be somewhere such a rank as man. And all the question rank there so long as only this, if God has placed him wrong. If you did a diagram of the great chain of being and you put all these links up there, right? One after the other, and you put God up here, angels, man, or humans, animals, plants, inanimate, and so on. Somewhere in that list, humans are going to have a place, correct? Because you're going from the infinite to the infinitely small. Let's do it this way. If I had a chalkboard, I would do this. I'd put the number 1 up here, and then I'd put number 10 down here. Okay, and I'd say, all right, this symbol is going to represent this many things, right? One thing. And this 1 0 is going to represent this many things. What's the logical thing you would have to say to me? Well, just think about it a minute. Would you not say, well, what about this many? You got to have something in between this and this. So I'll put, all right, this. And what else?
4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, all the other amounts, correct? So here's Pope saying this is a similar kind of a thing. If you have the infinite power all the way down to insignificant nothing, down to a rock, somewhere in there you have to account for everything that exists. You, everybody, correct? So our job, here's Pope saying, it's not a matter of if we are in somehow the chain of being, but the only argument we can make is, look how he phrases it, is only this: if God has placed him wrong, are we in the wrong spot in the great chain of being? Well, let's see. Should we be higher up? Who's up above this? All of us humans. The angelic host, right? Well, it's clearly we're not ready for that. Well, maybe we need to be down a notch. I know some people that probably fit there pretty well, don't you? We're just animals, other animals. We're not the plant kingdom. We're not rocks and stuff like that. So we have to accept our position in the great chain of being. And that's his argument. He is, remember when he started this, he said, I'm going to vindicate the ways of God. I mean, he is setting himself up. I had my lawyers, when I talked to them about this, about 3 or 4 of them were just sitting there going, yeah, okay. If you want to vindicate somebody of something, it implies that they have been accused of something. And vindication means, I'm going to get them off the hook. So I told him, I said, in some ways, Pope's acting like God's defense attorney. That God's been accused of making a mistake the way things are set up, and Pope's going to say, no, I've got the answer here. I'm going to vindicate him. I'm going to prove to you that he did not make a mistake, or it, she, whatever you call the great being. Okay? Let's go.
I have a question.
Yes, sure.
Was the term with the chain of being, was that something that was commonly discussed? And it was a term of
Very
art?
much so.
Okay.
Yeah, very much so. Pope's not the only writer that writes about it either. And people in everyday conversation, thinkers, or philosophers, so, yeah, they all knew it and they all used it quite often.
Okay.
In fact, it goes back beyond that. If you read enough Shakespeare, you'll see it popping up in there too. So they brought it on up into the Restoration. Okay, let's go a little further down here. Let's skip down to, about a little past halfway down that column. The section beginning, so man who hears seems principle alone. Everybody find that place? Okay, let's look at it. So man, humans, who here seem principle alone, P-A-L, right, the main ones, we seem like the superior beings in this planet, on this planet, right? Perhaps act second to some sphere unknown, touches some wheel, verges to some goal. And if you want to mark another line, check this one. 'Tis but a part we see and not a whole. One of our problems in understanding the great chain of being is what? We have limited vision. Remember, we're all imperfect. Sometimes we counsel young people, do we not? And it's hard to get across to them sometimes. With all of us, I'm most right now. This is awful. You're going through such a terrible time. But I can tell you from experience, we tell people sometimes. I went through a tragic situation in my youth too, and looking back, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Have we all had these experiences? Some didn't look, they may not have been tragic, but we just couldn't understand why me? Why did this happen to me? I didn't deserve this. Oh, this is terrible. I tell my wife all the time, if certain things hadn't happened to me in my life, I never would have met her. And I'm happy that did. Little tiny things, right? If that road had gone a little bit different way, you'd have missed each other altogether. Sometimes if you fail a test, oh my gosh. I started out in college as an architectural engineer. Going to change the shape of the skyline, you know, it's going to build big bridges and buildings and stuff like that. I ran face first into the trig. I didn't have any trigonometry in high school. It about blew my mind. Sam Tinsley would have a stroke if you heard me saying this. I found myself sitting at home and I'd look at these problems in trig and I couldn't figure out anything what was going on with that stuff, and so I'd pick up my literature book and read short stories and poetry and stuff like that. Finally, maybe you're in the wrong field, sir. But if I'd gone on and tried that, you know, wouldn't have worked out. All right? We've all had those experiences. I bet a lot of you in here started one way and wound up somewhere completely different. Okay, let's come on down to the bottom of that page, about 6 lines up from the bottom. Then say not man's imperfect, heaven in fault, say rather what?
Yes, that's perfect.
Man's as perfect as he ought. Don't say man's imperfect and it's heaven in fault. We're as perfect as we can be. He probably should have put in the adverb nearly, as much as I did adverb. We are as nearly perfect as we can be, because we're humans, right? Look at this. His knowledge measured to his state and place, his time a moment, and appoint his space. What would you say to, if you said to Pope, you say humans have just a time, our time is just a moment. I know a person who lived 100 years. You call that a moment? What would he say? It is a moment compared to what?
To God.
Compared to 1 billion years. We're just here for that long, right? I was reading a thing in the paper the other day about a guy that the oldest man on the planet supposedly died at 112 years old. We go, oh, that's a long life. Yeah, it is a long life, but compared to how long people have been here, not very long. Compared to dinosaurs, well, anyway, we won't go there. You never will. And look at the rest of that. His time, a moment, and what? A point. His space. Again, if you said to Pope, well, wait a minute. I know people who've been all over the world. I my own self have been around the world. Spent some time in Bangladesh. Tough. But you know, people who've traveled extensively, you say, how can you just call that a point? Well, it is a point compared to what?
Universe.
Even compared to our little universe, right? One of my colleagues, when I retired, gave me a photograph that one of his buddies pilfered from NASA. I keep waiting for the authorities to show up and reclaim it, but anyway, I was in his office one day, and Jerry Wallace, I haven't known him. And he had this beautiful framed photograph like this. It was when, way back when the spaceship flew through, past Jupiter, or Saturn, I'm sorry, and they had the rings. Beautiful photograph. I mean, it was just spectacular, it took my breath away. And there's a little white dot somewhere down in the bottom. And I said, idly, I said, I wonder what that is. He said, I asked my buddy the same question. He said, that's Earth. Excuse me? Well, I mean, this is common stuff now, isn't it? We've got these satellites flying around out there and stuff, and they take pictures of our little blue planet. It's just so pitifully insignificant, isn't it? Kind of makes you wonder about all these people that think that we've had space travelers here all the time. I wonder how they found us. Why would they pick this little bitty dot? I can see them flying toward the sun thinking, well, that's kind of bright. Maybe anyway, let's go a little bit further here with this. How are we doing time-wise? Okay?
All right, yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Maybe about 7 minutes.
Got it. Let's go to the next page. Section 3, everybody got it? Yes, sir. Thank you, Alvin. Anybody else didn't get a handout? There's some extra. Section 3, heaven from all creatures hides the book of faith, all but the page prescribed. Dear present state, there's a little metaphor, correct? The book of faith has all the answers to it, but how much of it do we see? One page. Some of us occupy just one page. Some of us occupy one sentence. Some of us are just a punctuation mark. Or just a period or a comma. That's all we see. We're limited individuals because our vision is limited, and that's the way God planned it. Come on down to about a third of the way, and the little indention. You're going to recognize something here. Hope humbly then with trembling pinions soar, wait the great teacher death, and God adore. How would death become a great teacher?
Once we're on the other side, we'll know more.
There you go, perfect. What future bliss he gives not thee to know, but gives that hope to be your blessing now. Allowing your hope. We have hope. He's given us hope. You recognize the next line? Did you know this is where it came from? Probably not. Hope springs eternal in the human breast. Man never is, but always to be blessed. We're never completely blessed. In this existence, we're never blessed with all knowledge because it was ordained that way. We are imperfect, right? But our blessing is always in the future. What future bliss he gives not thee to know. We'll find that out. I used to ask my dad, I wasn't a very bright kid, still not. But sometimes, you know, we all ask our parents questions. Dad, Mom, why is, you know, whatever. My dad was a religious man. He grew up a good hardcore Southern Baptist. God bless him. And I'd say things like, what's heaven like? I've heard about heaven in church. What is that? How's that going to be? And he might try to explain it. And you know, preachers, they've done that all the time. The streets paved with gold. You've heard all those, you know, the mansions, and we're all going to live lives of no want and all the rest of it. My dad a lot of times would come back on his favorite. He would say, well, son, I don't know the answer to that now, but once we get to heaven, we'll know all of that. God will explain all that to us. We'll know how it always. And I thought, okay, good enough for him, I'll take it. Good enough for me. But we can't help but wonder, correct? We can't help but wonder. Now, let's see. Yeah. Turn to page 4 with me. This is probably about as far as we'll be able to get with this. Come down to section 4 to the first invention, beginning in pride. Found that section? In pride, in reasoning pride, our error lies. All quit their sphere and rush into the skies. Pride still is aiming at the best of both. Men would be angels, angels would be gods. Well, you know, it's a matter of not accepting where we are, right? Let me skip over. I wanted to get to the last section of this. That's not where I wanted to go with it. But yeah, come with me to the last page. There's some stuff in here we don't have time for. I hope maybe you can read through this. By the way, this is just from the first epistle. This thing goes on for 4 chapters or epistles, if you please. So it's a long, drawn-out argument. But let's look at the last one, number 10, page 8. Cease then, nor order imperfection name. Our proper bliss depends on what we blame. Proper. Know thy own point. Not bad advice. This kind, this due degree of blindness, weakness, heaven bestows on thee. And then come down to about the last 6 lines. Here we go. All nature is but art, unknown to thee. All chance, you put the verb in here, is direction which you cannot see. All discord is harmony not understood. You ever go to a concert and the orchestra's up there blaring away and stuff and it sounds like a train wreck to you? Why? Well, but my musician buddy says because you haven't been trained to appreciate that kind of music. But trust me, it's not a train wreck. It's very carefully ordered. You just don't see the order and you don't appreciate it. Let's go a little further. All discord is harmony not understood. All partial evil, this is tough, is universal good. spite of pride, in spite of erring reason, one truth is clear. What is it?
Whatever it is right.
Whatever it is right. If it exists, it's correct, even though we can't see that. So all partial evil is universal good. I like to use the illustration, I'll leave you with this. You've all seen paintings done with the pointillism technique, where the artist just, the whole painting is a series of dots. If you get right here, what do you see? You see a lot of dots, correct? The farther back you get, what happens? Suddenly you see maybe a river, trees, some flowers, some people, and when you get far enough back, what happens to those dots? The individual dots just disappear, correct? You can't tell if it's maybe a photograph even, right? And that's Pope's whole argument here. We are too close to it, too limited to understand everything that God has put in place. But if it exists, it's right. It's correct. And our job then is what? Accept it.
Yeah.
Accept it. Hard to do sometime though, isn't it?
Not to change anything, just accept it?
Well, accept the fact that it's going to exist.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things, and I didn't go over that, one of the things that the neoclassics did was to suggest that the way you improve yourself and work yourself toward heaven is by study, improving your mind through good deeds. In other words, kind of work your way, you earn your way on up into the heavenly ranks, right? Not just that it was a gift. Not that God has said, you know, I'm giving you the gift of salvation or life after.
Thank you, Jerry.
That's a real sketchy little presentation, you know, but
Thank you.
maybe do a little bit of reading.
That's more than I've heard in many years.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for enlightening our minds today on literature and how to interpret it and a little bit about the process.
We're so glad that you've joined us in Discovery Class via live stream today, and we hope that you'll join us every Sunday when you're available. If it's possible for you to join us in person, we would love to meet you as well. We meet every Sunday morning, about 9:45, 9:50, in the parlor at Wilshire Baptist Church, 4316 Abrams Road here in Dallas. If you'd like to know more about Wilshire, visit our website at wilshirebc.org, or also check out our YouTube channel at Wilshire BC on YouTube.